Welcome to the Problematic Gaze with me, Lee Arnott.
And me, Dave Moore.
Each episode, we will take a piece of British or sometimes international pop culture from the last 60 years and examine it through the problematic lens. Is it problematic? If it is problematic, what that says about society and culture then, and what it says about society and culture now.
So how are you?
I'm good. I've got full of cold, so I've got a really good podcast voice today, but never mind. I've just had my head over a bowl full of boiling Vicks with a tea towel on my head. I want to talk about a few things today before we jump into Man About the House.
Yes.
70s sitcom. Do you feel as though a kind of like a little weight has been lifted? Do you know what I mean by that?
Are you referring to the election? Yes. Yes, it does, doesn't it? Do you know what's been really interesting? I was expecting to feel this huge elation.
Yeah.
And actually it's been more subtle than that. It's been, as each progressive day goes on and you see some new announcements, some new member of cabinet or some new policy, then it just feels like that weight is just going up and up and up and up a bit more. It's lovely. It might not last, but while it does, I'm really
it might not
enjoying
last.
it.
I was thinking today when I was walking the dogs, I'm just quite enjoying not feeling angry about everything to do with politics.
Yeah, me too.
You know, like a weight has been lifted for a while. Obviously, it wasn't all plain sailing. You know, various other parties have got quite a large share of the votes.
Yeah.
Slightly worrying going into the future. But I think just in general, it's just nice to see the grown-ups in charge just for a bit.
Yes, it does feel like that, doesn't it?
And I think you're right. There wasn't that overwhelming sense of joy and elation doing cartwheels down the street, etc. But I think we were very magnanimous in victory. I mean, you know, I live in quite a conservative area and the conversations down the pub wasn't as if I kind of ran in waving my hands in the air going, yeah, beat you. Do you know what I mean? It was just more like, commiserations, mate. Yeah, the Tories are out, but there you go.
Did your seat turn Labour or Lib Dem?
It did. It turned Labour. Yes, from a heavily conservative, there was quite a bit of a swing to Labour, as was all over the country, really, wasn't there? Not everywhere, but... Did you manage to stay up all night?
Did I bollocks? Do you know, just about half an hour before that exit poll, I suddenly had the fear. And I'd never really consciously thought about it, but I suddenly thought, oh my God, what happens if all the polls are wrong or everybody's come out and voted Tory or Reform? And I just had the fear. And then when the exit poll came out, I was like, oh my God. Then it was just like, okay. And then about an hour later, I was asleep.
Yeah.
I had all good intentions. I was going to be up. I was going to see all the big hitters go at 3 a.m. I was ready. Nah. I think it was maybe just all that adrenaline just went, okay, bed.
Yeah.
Did you?
I managed to stay up till 3:30, waiting for the big 3 o'clock purge, which didn't seem to happen. Yeah. And about 3:15, I was like, they were saying, oh, we're going to come to this place soon. We're going to come to this place soon. But things have been delayed. I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm off to bed. I can't be dealing with it. I really wanted to stay up to see Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I just couldn't. I couldn't. Someone said that he'll be on, you know, like Michael Portillo travels around my country on a train.
Yeah.
Jacob Rees-Mogg is going to do something similar. What could he do?
On a penny farthing.
Travels with my nanny.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to talk about the French election as well. Vive la France and all that.
Yeah,
that's
very good news.
Say about that. The French always seem to come through, don't they? I mean, they had a bit of a scare and they were like, fucking hell, let's regroup and let's just sock it to them.
I think the first round seems to be heart emotional votes, and then the second round is more, right, let's think about this now. We've given them a message. Very good news, obviously. Vive la République.
Vive la République. Did you see the little clip of Marine Le Pen crying?
I did, and I shouldn't take pleasure in other people's sorrow and misfortune, but I have really enjoyed watching the salty tears of the French far right being videoed, watching that exit poll.
Yeah.
And I know it's wrong, and I know karma will come and bite me on the backside, but it's quite delicious.
It's quite satisfying, isn't it? Right, football.
Bollocks. Next.
I like football. Well, I like football during the Euros and during the World Cup where you can go
Exactly.
outside
You're
and
an
cheer
occasional.
along.
You're a fair weather fan.
I am a
Next
fair
topic.
weather fan, but I have
Next
to say
topic.
they're doing well. I mean, everyone's slating them, saying they're not doing much. But if you get to semi-finals, you must be doing something, unless every other team is shit.
Right.
So we'll see. We're on Wednesday. All right. Is anything you've been watching this week?
I'm not embarrassed to say that I've really become obsessed with the second season of Traitors USA. It's not as good as the British. Nothing ever taps the British one. And I've watched the Australian. I'm trying to get my hand on the Canadian one. I've watched the New Zealand one. I've watched, obviously, the first season of the American one. But this season has been very good. And if you do like Traitors, once you get past the fact that they're all reality TV stars in America, except John Bercow, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, which is really random. It's very good. That I've just been obsessed with that all week. Have you had anything interesting?
I have. I've been scrolling through Instagram and I've discovered Idaho inmate pen pal.
Are you writing to prisoners trying to find a relationship, David?
I'm not, but I thought I might send it to you, the link to you. I'm aware that the dating pool in London is pretty thin on the ground.
Yeah, it's tight. It's like being in a village.
Yeah, it's very. Do you know Elaine Figgis, Catherine Tate character, where she makes pen pal with a serial killer in the US? You know, some of these. So it's called Idaho Inmate Pen Pal, and it's just basically inmates talking to camera on a webcam saying, "Oh, I'm due for parole in 6 months' time. It'd be nice to kind of write to people and maybe get to know you." No indication of what they're in there for, etc. Not that I'm casting judgment. I'm totally casting judgment. But I have to say, there's a mixture between looking completely insane and looking insanely hot.
That sounds like my dating history, really.
Well, look it up. There's a lot of tattoos going on, which is, again, I've got a tattoo, not necessarily a bad thing. It's called Idaho Inmate Pen Pal. Yeah, I've noticed they've got the comments turned off, so you can't comment on them. But yeah, some of them are pretty hot, actually, I have to say.
Step away from the phone, David. Put it down.
Just scrolling. There's no harm in window shopping. I mean, they're all in Idaho. As long as I don't make any physical contact with them, I guess it's all right just to have a little perv/look, isn't it?
I'm writing from England, United Kingdom.
I'm 49 years old. All right, enough of that.
What are we going to talk about today?
So today we're going to go backwards in time a little bit, because we've been focusing on kind of 80s, 90s, our childhood eras. But we're going to go back this time to 15th of August, 1973, which was when Man About the House, a British sitcom, was first transmitted. So Man About the House was created by Brian Cook and Johnny Mortimer. It starred Richard O'Sullivan, Paula Wilcox and Sally Thompson, and also co-starred Yootha Joyce and Brian Murphy, who later went on to star as George and Mildred. It was 6 series. They were broadcast from 1973 to 1976, and the series was considered daring at the time because it featured a man sharing a London flat with 2 single women. Now, that's all I'll say about it at the moment, apart from the fact that it was made by Thames Television. It went on to provide 2 spin-offs, George and Mildred and Robin's Nest, and there was a film version later released in 1974.
1973, what a big year. It's the year I was born. I mean, that's all we need to talk about in world events, isn't it? That's enough.
Yeah, well, talk about Christmas. That was like the second coming, really, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, even though I was born in February. But the 1st of January, a big year for the United Kingdom as we enter the EEC, the European Economic Community. After much wrangling and a referendum to decide whether the country should join, indeed it did. Yeah.
That was when there was still a semblance of sanity in the UK.
Yes, before it became a basket case. Vietnam War ends, huge for America. I mean, that has a huge impact on American culture. Films especially get quite dark. There's a real cynicism about government that hadn't been present in America before. It just kind of really shakes the fabric of American society up, I think.
Yeah, Richard Nixon in January of this year was sworn in.
Yeah, Watergate will blow up this year. The Northern Ireland conflict is rumbling on, getting really horrific. 1973 is a really bloody year of the conflict. But interestingly, because Bloody Sunday's been the year before, the British press are now starting to lay less of it pretty much on government directive. So for mainland, I use that term in inverted commas, viewers are getting less and less news of Northern Ireland because it's too horrific for words, what's happening there. So quite a grim year, 1973, actually. Britain's economy's an absolute shit heap. It's really crap.
Yeah, well, just going back to the Northern Ireland, my mum and dad were married in 1973, and they came down to London for their honeymoon, more or less about the time that this was first transmitted. Man About the House,
right.
And they stayed in a hotel in Marble Arch, and they about a week before they came, there was a car bomb planted by the IRA just around the corner. So there were actually 4 car bombs planted in London on the same day in March, which killed 1 person and injured over 200 people. So there was that sense of kind of, flux going on in the UK, the sense of flux going on in the USA with the Vietnam War. So it was quite a tumultuous time, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And a dreadful tragedy just a week before this episode broadcast on the Isle of Man, the Summerland amusement park. It's basically it's a bit like Centre Parks of the 1950s, basically, but it catches fire and kills 51 people. There's a very interesting little documentary on YouTube about it, but it's super horrific. It really, in the middle of summer, this desperate tragedy happens.
I've never heard of that. I have to look that up.
Yes, it's one that kind of gets forgotten about.
So that was the news of the year. Let's move on to TV landscape. So we're looking at this through a kind of remembering eyes now rather than experiencing eyes for the first time, aren't we? But actually, it's kind of surprising, having looked through this before we started the podcast, how much I remember or how much has been repeated or how much has impacted on the cultural psyche moving forward.
I mean, I think it's really interesting. There is a lot of new, very big comedies and TV shows begin their lives that year in 1973. Whatever happened to the Like Lads? Some others do have them. Are You Being Served gets a full series after its pilot the year before. Last for the Summer Wine. Big hitting sitcoms, which will run for a long, long time, all begin in 1973. That's Life begins on BBC One. That will run for years and years. Esther Ranson's Sunday night consumer show, famous of wonky vegetables and Jobsworths and all that kind of stuff. I noticed The Tomorrow People begins in 1973 on ITV, which is like ITV's really low budget. I mean, if you think Doctor Who's budget was low, The Tomorrow People's budget is so low. And it was ITV's answer to Doctor Who, which ran 4 or 5 years.
I never saw that. Did you kind of watch that retrospectively?
I only watched it last year, actually, and I had to give up after 2 seasons. So if there were any Tomorrow People fans out there, it was really hokey. But I do one of the cliffhangers from it is imprinted on, must have been my 2 or 3 year old brain, where a nurse runs into this hospital room, does something to one of the characters on the bed, and then jumps out of the window. And you see her from outside falling out the window. And as she falls, her body catches fire as it falls to the ground in this level. I saw that like children, and I absolutely shat myself.
And this is a kids program.
Chill kids program. And it seared itself on my brain. So what was in the charts that week, Pop Pickers? Let's have a listen. Let's have a little look to see August 1973.
Okay, so first thing I noticed on this was, a little cringy mention of what was at number 1. Go on, you say it.
I'm the leader of the gang, I am, by Gary Glitter. Yeah.
Let's move on to what was at number 2.
Number 2. Oh, Yesterday Once More by the Carpenters. And dear listeners, can I just reveal that I absolutely love the Carpenters? Yesterday Once More is one of my favourites. Never got to number 1. Kept off by Gary Glitter. Gary Glitter kept off Karen Carpenter. There's a headline.
No, I've got very, very many memories of watching you sway drunkenly with a glass of rum in your hands to Karen Carpenter's the Carpenters hits in a little world of your own. Yeah, just watching you from a corner and videoing you.
You're not the first. You won't be the last, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Number 4, Welcome Home. Welcome.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, not a lot of
Not
kind
a
of
lot, really.
resonant ones, apart from number 13, Life on Mars, obviously, David Bowie.
Yeah, Touch Me in the Morning, number 11. Touch Me in the Morning, Diana Ross, number 11.
Oh, yes.
All Right Now, 3. There are some
Yeah.
big hitters, but there's a lot of real stuff in there. Which is
Yeah.
just, you know,
I mean, this was before disco kicked in, wasn't it? Kind of well before disco kicked in. So it's kind of like the lull.
Yeah.
Really, there's not
Yes,
much stuff that's kind of resonated in the public psyche or...
Well, the Osmonds are there. Mungo
Yes.
Jerry to some extent. You know, Nazareth were quite big. Donny Osmond's got a hit as well as the Osmonds. But yeah, it's a little underwhelming. Apart from number 29, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree by Dawn.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the one. That's the killer.
Yeah. Elton John, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting.
As if Elton never had a fight on a Saturday night. Okay, so what happens in this episode? Two girls sharing a flat in London, Chrissie and Jo, after having hosted a party, find a man in their bath. And after realizing that this man can cook very well, they end up asking him to move in with them, much to the initial concern of their landlord and landlady who live downstairs, George and Mildred. And I'm sure that hijinks will ensue. What's your relationship to Man About the House, Dave?
Have
you seen it before?
Got no relationship really to Man About the House. I'm aware of its existence.
Right.
I'm aware it spawned characters of George and Mildred. Other than that, I'd never seen an episode. I've maybe seen little clips here and there on, review shows,
right,
but never actually sat down and watched an episode. And we watched the series 1, episode 1, didn't we? So it was kind of the basic setup of the whole thing. Yeah. So I was aware of Paula Wilcox. I was aware of Richard O'Sullivan as this character because I think he went on to, in various spin-offs, etc. I wasn't aware of Sally Thompson, who apparently was in the Railway Children, which I didn't know.
Yes, she was.
But other than that, no, I hadn't. I don't have any relationship to it whatsoever. But I was really pleased that you suggested it.
Right. Because I remember when Channel 4 first started, repeated the whole thing, and I loved it. I must have been about 11 or 12. Absolutely adored it, and I was so gutted when it ended. But then they showed the film as well, which wasn't as good. So I remember it really well from its second kind of repeat run. And I thought it was great. And what did you think of it when you watched it? What did you think of this episode?
I really enjoyed it. I thought the writing in particular was really spot on. I just thought it was really sharp. I think a lot of 70s sitcoms that you watch, you're kind of a little bit laboured and tired jokes and stuff, but it felt actually quite fresh, really sparky writing. And, the characters bounced off each other, good characterizations and funny, just really witty jokes, etc.
Yeah.
Few issues I had with the script later on in the episode, but we'll talk about that a bit later.
I'm
but
sure.
I
I'm
thought
sure
actually I thought it was just quite fresh.
Yeah, me too. I obviously hadn't seen it since the 80s, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought it was quite nicely, understatedly groundbreaking, actually, just in terms of representations of the female characters and their agency within it and the role of men within it. And actually and I can get, it was not controversial, but it did raise eyebrows. As you said earlier, it was the first time we see a man and a woman living together in sin, which was the only time men lived together in culturally up until that point. So,
but also in a platonic relationship at this stage, anyway. I don't know what develops later on, but it was very much a case of so basically what happens is their third female flatmate, who we don't see, left and had a baby, and there was a party the night before when she left and went into labour, and this man woke up. He was one of the dregs of the party, left over in the party, slept in the bath. And so he very quickly they suggest that he moves in with them. When they find out that he can cook, which I thought was a really good reversal of gender stereotypes, if you want to get all wanky about it. I thought, I was interested to hear your take on this, like, representations of females, or if this was considered something new on TV.
Absolutely, it was. Absolutely. There'd been a TV show called The Lovers the year before, which I believe Paula Wilcox was in, which had caused a scandal because it showed two young people in a relationship who weren't married. And I think at one point in this episode we watched, Robin actually says we are the permissive society after all, so there is a sense that boundaries are being loosened up, rules are being broken. There's some lovely snapshots in this episode which situated it right in 1973.
Yeah.
They talk about at the wedding party, the bride had gone into labour
And that was,
Yeah.
my mum and dad had to get married in 1973, and I'm in all the wedding photographs because my mother is like
Right.
7 months pregnant and absolutely
I
enormous.
see.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's a lot of brides getting married because there's still a sense in some families that's what you have to do if somebody gets pregnant. And interesting, my dad's family were the ones who made them get pregnant. My mum's family didn't give a shit. What I thought was really interesting was their ownership of their own kind of sexuality and their sex lives, the girls in it, the women in it. Because Jo mentions when she gives Robin this flouncy dressing gown, she mentions it belonged to one of her ex-lovers. And when they find Robin in the bath, I think Chrissie says, "Is he one of yours?" So the girls are talking about that they've had ex-lovers before. And they're clearly ex-lovers who are not just stayed boyfriends. They've obviously had sex with them. And I thought that was really incredible that they are owning their sexuality and being allowed to own it actually on 1970 television is really interesting.
I thought what was really interesting was that as Robin's cooking, he's decided to stay for dinner because the girls can't cook. That's one of the running jokes. The girls can't cook, even cook scrambled eggs, but the boy is a really good cook. And while he's cooking, another potential housemate comes to view the flat, Gabrielle, she's called, who I think represents kind of like the old female guard. Is like a real contrast, a representation of a female, which is kind of like the old guard compared to these two new modern females.
I think absolutely. I think it's no coincidence that she's got a very upper class accent.
Mm-hmm.
She's dressed in this quite conservative, like 3-piece suit. And she's clearly not the same kind of fun-loving. I guess old critics would have described her as frigid, probably, as how she would have been described in the character description.
Yeah.
And you're right, I think she does represent this kind of collision of these two worlds where Chrissie and Jo are these young, forward-thinking, whereas the posh girl, I can't remember her name. Gabrielle. Yeah, it's an interesting contrast, isn't it? Circling back to your point earlier on about, Robin cooking, there was a lovely comment from Jen, I think she says, "Oh, you'll make someone a lovely wife one day," which was really lovely. Again, just that gender reversal roles. One thing I love about this show is the title sequence and the music. The music, I just absolutely adore it. And it's always one of my little go-to melodies in my head. One of my oldest dear friends, if he gets nervous or scared, he's walking the dog late at night in a creepy area because he lives in the countryside, he just starts to whistle the Man About the House theme tune to himself. And immediately he feels much calmer. But interestingly, in the title sequence, there's a real emphasis on Sally Thompson's sexuality. She's the camera lingers on her bottom as her name comes up. Actually, within the show, although she's portrayed as the ditzy blonde character, she clearly knows what's going on and clued up on things, which the opening titles might not make you think of that character, which I thought was really interesting. But I love it.
Well, maybe that's why what they were. I mean, I don't know if I'm being too cerebral about it, but maybe that's what they were trying to set her up to be. So when we actually got to the story, it was she was like objectified. And then when it got to the story, we saw actually it was a 3-dimensional character who kind of used her sexuality, and who owned her sexuality. So talk to me about George and Mildred then. A particular Mildred, her character. What did you think about her?
Again, I just love George and Mildred. I still will rewatch George and Mildred over Manor House on YouTube if I've had too much rum and Karen Carpenter's finished on the jukebox. What an icon Yootha Joyce as Mildred. She's just, their interplay is so fabulous. George and Mildred listeners are clearly trapped in this loveless marriage, although Mildred is still really horny all the time. They must be in their 50s. Mildred is just dressed like this amazingly glamorous glamour puss the whole time. And George's is dour, in a suit, comb over. They're just brilliant. Her disparagement of him. He's another guy in this situation. He's completely emasculated by her. All he's bothered about is his budgies, basically.
Yeah. I suppose it kind of harks back. We talked about a lower low about the female representation of the older females. Would you say that this was more progressive than the older females in the lower low with her, or do you think she was? Do you think she was portrayed as that it was something to be sad about, that she was a horny older woman, or was it? Do you think they celebrated it?
She's glorious with it. She's her performance, her outfits. This is a woman who absolutely knows what she wants. She lusts after Robin. Right, he's got this flouncy dressing gown on. She just wants to get into his pants.
Yeah,
and she's owning it. And it's interesting, isn't it? We think progress is always linear, you know, that more rights are made, attitudes change, but we can see that doesn't happen, you know, because Hello puts women, old women especially, right back in a certain bracket.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Mildred is on screen the same time as Mrs. Slocum. So we get two representatives, an older lady, one who is obsessed with her pussy, and Mrs. Slocum. No, joking. One's obsessed with her pussy, and Mildred, who's kind of is really, but they're owning it in different ways. But Mrs. Slocum is a figure of comedy, whereas I think Mildred is she's just marvelous.
She's kind of in a league of her own, really, isn't she?
Absolutely.
I mean, she kind of steals the show in a way.
Yeah, she does. I just think they're great. I think Yootha Joyce is a legend, to be honest. Did you notice that there was one, because obviously this was filmed in front of a live audience, there was one audience member who was finding it hilarious.
It really knocked me.
But
yeah. It really knocked me. For the first 5 minutes, I thought that this laughter is just over the top, unbearable. Yeah. It was too loud in the mix, and it was just, my God, I can't bear it. But then I kind of got sucked into it, and it was fine. But the laugh, it wasn't canned laughter, it was audience laughter, wasn't it? But it was something else.
Yes, yeah. So there is one unfortunate bit of this episode, which I have to say I found quite triggering, as young people would say. And that was at the end. Would you like to explain what happened? It's the gay thing, isn't it?
It's the gay thing. Yeah, I found it quite triggering too, actually. It was the one thing in the episode that really stuck out to me as being problematic, which, again, it's like this fundamental crux of this podcast is finding things that were probably not problematic at the time, but we'd find problematic now. And this was the kind of the gay references. So basically what happens is Richard O'Sullivan's character, Robin, mentions to the girls that he met a guy at their party who suggested that he would have a room to let in his flat. So Richard O'Sullivan calls the character, and unbeknownst to him, but known to the girls, the person he's calling with reference to room in the flat is a gay character. So they find it quite hilarious that Robin's calling the guy, and it becomes to Robin throughout the course of the telephone conversation that the guy wants him to move in because he's had a tiff with his boyfriend and he sees Robin as a potential new love interest, which in itself is quite a good plot device. But some of the language used in it, problematic. And also then later on, towards the end of the episode, the main payoff, the main punchline is when George and Mildred come up and George complains that, you know, the girls can't possibly have a male housemate. They tell him Richard O'Sullivan is a puff, so it's fine there's going to be no sexual shenanigans because he's gay.
Yeah. Which I guess is actually on paper not particularly problematic, but what's problematic is the way it's dressed up in this early 70s references that straight characters used to denote gay people. And Chrissie does the classic, does a limp wrist impression and the kind of mincy face, you know, because obviously in 1973, all gay men are camp. That's the way that is representing gay men.
And sorry to interrupt, but possibly quite predatory as well.
Yes, absolutely. And just think of the other representation of gay characters on TV at the time, probably Dick Emery, and Mrs. Slocum, not Mrs. Slocum, Mr. Humphreys, Why Being Served. And I think The Naked Civil Servant by Quentin Crisp had come out the year before, but that's it. Yes. They're the only representation of gay characters on TV. So I remember all the time when I was a kid, I'd get someone doing the floppy hand thing at me.
Yeah.
Even me dad sometimes. And the word puff, I'd get that leveled at me so much that I remember probably about the age of 10, even if I heard the word mentioned, like powder puff or puffing books at school, I'd get a little terror inside me because it had been used so badly against me all the time.
Yeah, I'm the same. It would, if anything was mentioned that, or if anything was, you know, we're talking about later on in our childhood, so kind of early 80s. So it was even got, you know, even though this is 73, we're talking about even in the early 80s, any mention of that, or if you saw something on telly that represented homosexuality, or someone mentioned a puff, or in the playground someone called you a puff, or you were challenged by it, it would bring you out in kind of like cold tingles, kind of like your heart would race, and you'd break out into a cold sweat and panic. You know, we talked about it before about, you know,
definitely.
having to put on this mask of masculinity. So, you know, because to be called that would be one of the most horrendous things you could
Oh,
experience.
absolutely, the worst, the worst. So yeah, I watched it. I was a bit, oh, I felt a bit,
Yeah.
I was a bit disappointed in Chrissy's character. But
Yeah.
then contextualizing it, that was the representation. That was a shorthand for the audience, I guess. You want to look at it technically, just to show that, oh, this is a gay character. But it was a
Yeah.
bit,
Yeah, I just feel like the story or element of it didn't bother me. It was the
no,
language that was used.
yes, yeah,
And you say like the
yeah,
physical representations that they, you know, the mimicry they use, like you say,
yes,
the limp
yeah.
wrist, etc. That it did. I mean, I'm not saying it triggered me into an emotional breakdown, but it just brought back that
No,
little kind of fear that you
yeah,
experienced when you were young. You
absolutely.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was what was quite nice for me actually was it brought it back. And then I remembered I used to have that reaction to it, which I don't have anymore because the word doesn't
No,
have power for me anymore.
no.
But putting it back to then, it was like, oh, just a little shiver goes down your spine, doesn't it? It's really
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it,
anything
how
else? I
things
mean,
trigger you? You know, it's funny how
yeah,
things, you know, for that. I mean, we've been through a shared experience, you know, that a lot of gay men and women go through when they're
mm,
kids, you know, especially people of our age, you know, pushing our 50s and stuff. It pulls, you know, certain things. Like it might be a conversation between men at the pub, and it might be between men trying to overcompensate and show that they're not homophobic or they are accepting with some of the language
yes,
they can use. Or, you know, if you're in the pub and you know, there are other men there talking, and one of them will reference, you know, still use being gay as a kind of a derogatory
yeah, yeah, yeah.
thing. It can just pull you all the way back, can't you? I mean, we're more armed to counter it now or to
Yes,
pull them
yes,
up on it
definitely.
now.
A couple of things I'd like to mention before we finish
Yeah.
up on about the house. Um, they make it clear, Sally and Chrissy and Joe, that there's going to be no sex in this. Obviously, they lay the rules out, which I thought was really nice. I thought when they find him in the shower and he's trying to get out of the shower, he does that physical comedy, Richard O'Sullivan. I think the cast are brilliant, all of them.
Mm.
They've clearly got really great chemistry going on. I just thought they were really good. Part of the comedy with the posh girl, what's her name? Gabrielle, is
Yes.
that George mistakes her for Robin in a frock and then goes to
Yes.
poke her boobs to much hilarity. And just a hint of, that behavior wasn't unexpected from men at the time,
Yeah.
that there is a sense, okay, this is what we have to put up with. And they say things like, oh, he's never done that before. And he didn't even say please, says
Yes.
Gabrielle. It's just like, okay, so
Yeah.
this is the little hint. I mean, women can just, their bodies to be touched and to be
Yeah.
looked at and to be manhandled, literally. That was it. That's all I have. All my notes for this show. I really enjoyed it, apart from a
Yeah.
little puff. I think we
And
had
very enjoyable, very
very
kind
enjoyable.
of modern in some aspects, but quite regressive in one aspect in particular, as we've talked
Yeah,
about. But
but I would absolutely kill for Yootha Joyce's wardrobe. I'm putting that out there now.
yes.
Just oh my god, I could just walk around my house in those all day in those outfits, changing. She obviously changes her outfit a couple of times a day as well. The character,
Darling,
I just want
I've
that.
seen you walking around in those outfits. I thought you modeled yourself on her. Some of the
Right.
numbers I see
Well,
you parade around in. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, brilliant.
crashing on.
So that was Man About the House. What are we going to be talking about next week, Lee?
I want to kiss you in Paris.
What?
I want to hold your hand in Rome.
Okay.
I don't really. We're going to be looking at, well, next week on the Problematic Gaze, for the first time, we're looking at a music video when we look at Madonna, Justify My Love. Are you still in the room, David?
Yeah, just breathing. Just breathing. Yeah, I'm fine, I'm good. Yeah, Madonna's Justify My Love video from 1990. Hugely controversial at the time, but is it still controversial? We'll find out next week.
Waiting. Oh, sorry. Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
You trying to turn me on or something?
Get back to your prisoners for that, love. See you next week.
Yeah, I'm just going to scroll some more Idaho Prisoners. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.